Imagine a day where children are guided and nurtured in a way that honors their unique humanness. A day where, instead of being expected to change in order to fit in, children can be met right where they're at. Welcome to Where They're Planted, a podcast for parents and care providers of unique children. Caring for a child with a developmental, emotional, or behavior challenge, a neurodiverse brain, or difficult early life experiences can be confusing and exhausting. On this podcast, we'll help your child flourish and strengthen their roots by helping you not only understand them, but also gain the skills to help them bloom where they're planted. We'll use brain science, nervous system tools, collaborative strategy sessions, and a deep understanding of the developmental process to create a fertile environment around your child in order to nurture their growth. I am your host, Jen Bluske, an occupational therapist with over 25 years of experience and a parent coach. My most closely held title, however, is that of a single mom of 2 thriving adopted kids, so I have walked this walk. I am truly excited to share, teach, and dive into these important topics on each episode. Welcome back to Where They're Planted, the podcast where we get curious about who our kids really are, how their brains and their bodies work, and what it means to meet them right where they're at. I'm Jen Bluske. I am the host. I'm an OT and parent coach, and most importantly, parent. And I'm really excited about today's topic. In this episode, we are going to be talking about something that every parent with big feeling or challenging kids might bump into, and that is communication. We're going to talk about the words we use, the timing, our tone, our body language, the state of our own nervous system, and how it all adds up to either connection or just a blasted disaster. Today is just part 1 of a 2-part series, and we are going to be laying the foundation of communication with our kids. And we are going to start today really with why our state as adults matters more than really what we're saying, and how regulation or dysregulation shapes every conversation before we even really open our mouths. We know this as parents, right? You know, that the same conversation can go really well or really poorly, depending on kind of the state that we are in. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're also going to break down what active and reflective listening is in real time and give some practical suggestions around that. And we're going to dig into a concept in communication that we just don't talk about very much with kids, and that's the concept of consent in communication and what that looks like to really invite a child into communication and into a conversation while we're still keeping our boundaries and safety. And then we are also going to explore how the shift in our language that we can make to really match our child's actual development and their individual neurology, not just their age, is sometimes key in having effective communication with our kids. And I hope by the end of this episode, you have a framework for really how to approach communication in order to get through those hard moments with more calm and more clarity. So let's just chit chat a little bit about why communication could be so tricky with kids in generally, and then sometimes with our kids with bigger behaviors or bigger feelings, neurodivergence, trauma histories, anxiety, sensory needs, all of the uniqueness and amazingness that we talk about on this podcast. When I think about why communication can sometimes be so tricky, it's interesting because communication is a way of connecting. It's a way of pulling our internal world to our external world. It's a way of taking that inner monologue that we have and creating some understanding. And especially when I think about neurodivergence, I have had so many very articulate folks with neurocomplex brains tell me that there isn't any way that they have found to truly use our words, our language that we have accessible to us, to relay what's happening on the inside. And so I know that communication can be really challenging because sometimes there's just this chasm of understanding difference that can happen between what we're experiencing and what we're trying to use really a pretty simplistic tool, which is language, to express. The other thing that we know with neurodivergence in our kiddos with autism or ADHD or anxiety is that sometimes the way the prosody or the back and forth of communication can be incredibly confusing. So, for example, the ability to answer a question can be really, really challenging, right? Questions are fraught with expectation, whereas sometimes the answer, if it's provoked in a different way through really attuned communication, is much easier for a child. We know that communication can sometimes be really, really, really tricky due to old patterns for folks with trauma histories, right? For folks with trauma histories saying, "How'd you sleep last night?" That communication, even though it's pretty benign, can be really, really challenging to answer or to respond to in any sort of way based on the communication pattern that's happened in the past. The other thing I really like to think about as I'm framing, why we're talking about communication when we're thinking about really supporting our kids is when we think about really any expression that comes from ourselves in any way, it's communication. It's communication in some way. And so when we think about, sometimes our most challenging of quote unquote behaviors, some of the most challenging things we see from our kids, I want to think about reframing it. I want to think about it in a way of, gosh, what are they trying to tell me right now that maybe they're not able to tell me, or maybe we're not able to have a conversation around in a traditional way, even though it is a communication? Can we reframe some of this into communicative effort, communicative intent, even if it's not in the way that our presumably neurotypical adult brains think of communication? Because communication is much more vast than that. And so that's the context that I really want to come at today with, is the context of, let's broaden our idea of communication. Let's get more nuanced. Let's think about it a little deeper with the purpose of really being able to support and meet our kids where they're at in order to create connection, in order to create understanding. Step one, as you've learned, if you've listened to any podcasts from me on this show, step one is going to be regulation. So how am I talking about regulation when we're talking about communication? And when we're thinking about creating effective communication with our kids, our regulation state that we come in with is going to be everything in a communication, right? So our nervous system state is going to set the stage for effectiveness when we're talking to our kids. Wait, I know that when I come in the door after work and I've had a long, hard day, I have a headache, I don't want to make dinner, I've had, 4 or 5 really rough interactions and my nervous system is just shot. I'm dysregulated. And when I walk in the door, my communication might be, nobody cleaned up the way they were supposed to. This house is a mess, right? That's me coming at communication from a really dysregulated nervous system. I'm not in my window of tolerance. I'm not in a place of regulation. I also know that if I come into the same environment, the same set of circumstances where my kids didn't do their chores after school and the house is a mess, in a regulated state, my communication might be different. My communication might be, you know what? We need to really probably talk about the house, but I'm going to need to take a few minutes and get myself together. And then let's talk about what happened with the chores today. See the shift in communication there? I'm not going to let go of the fact that we need to have a conversation about getting the chores done. But my regulation state is going to be the driver of how much connection can happen within the engagement. The other thing I want to talk about with regulation and co-regulation in communication is that there is power to when we start communication from a dysregulated place, an unregulated place, and it blows up, there is power to going back to repair. There is power to saying something to the effect of, oof, I wasn't able to listen the way you needed me to. Or, ooh, that my tone, I didn't mean to yell there. That was a yell. I didn't mean to yell. Let me do that over. Let me try that again. Let me do that better. We've talked about repair quite a bit on this podcast. And from a communication perspective, I'm communicating that seeking of connection, that seeking of back and forth engagement with my child and how we restart it. This is vital to teach our kids, right? Breakdowns in communication and engagement happen all the time, every day, in all parts of our life. The power is being able to come back around and reset our nervous system, reset our regulation state, and be able to say, hey, let me try that different. I know, like in my own parenting, one of my kids will start the same story for the 57th time, where like something with friends and doesn't feel good. And, they have to vent about it. And, I know for personal experience, I have, after a long day, raised my head and rolled my eyes and said, oh, we're going to talk about this again. And seeing the look of defeat on my kids' faces because I wasn't able to come at it from a regulated place. And the power of the repair saying, whoa, sorry about that. I'm feeling super tired, but I do want to hear you. And then communicating what needs to happen for myself or from a timing perspective, in order to truly have the communication with my child. So that's how regulation ties in to the idea of communication. The next thing I want to talk about from a communication perspective, when we're like, God, my kids just never listen to me. They never listen to anything I say. I hear this one so often from parents, and it is, it's the plight of parents, right? Our kids it feels like they're never hearing us. And the strategy that I always give parents is actually, we're going to hear them first. Okay, so this is active and reflective listening. This is old, tried and true knowledge base that we have in the world of relationship, generally in relationship. And man, is it hard to do, especially with our kids. So what is active and reflective listening? What active listening is just what it sounds like. Actively listening. It is showing that when somebody is communicating to us, signs that we are truly hearing them. Signs could be eye contact, if that's comfortable. For some kids, that doesn't feel comfortable. It might be the small, oh, that happens in reciprocity when there is communication going back and forth. It might be a clarifying question here or there, right? Oh, were you at the back of the bus or the front of the bus when that happened? So actively listening is different than your child talking while you're on your phone, making dinner, doing your work, head in a laptop, eyes to a screen. That is not active listening. We might say, yeah, we've heard them say all these, they talk to us all day long, and so they should, but they never listen to me. Well, we're not showing that we're listening to them. That's not active listening. When we create moments of active listening, because let's be real, we are not going to always be able to actively listen to our kids in our days. But when we create moments of active listening, what happens is we're modeling one side of communication, right? Communication is a ping pong. The ball goes back and forth in a communication between two people. And two, we're letting their nervous systems know that they're really seen, right? Which that is all the juicy felt safety that we have talked about. That is all of the sense of autonomy that we have talked about. That is all the deep attachment that we have talked about. We're letting our kids know, like, I see you as your own human. I see your experience. We want our kids to see our points of view sometimes, right? It's important that you don't have a phone because of XYZ. That's going to be real hard for a kid to hear. It starts with us being actively listening to them. And then reflectively listening is just taking it a little bit of a step further. Reflective listening is reflecting back what you hear them saying, just the gist of it, just the nugget of it. Our child is saying, it wasn't fair. I got pushed down on the playground and then I got kicked out of the game at school. Right? A reflective listening might be something like, it sounds like that was a really big bummer when you got pushed down on the playground. Or, whoa, you got pushed down on the playground. It's just repeating back what they said. We might be adding an emotion. Sometimes they don't want that added. We are not teaching. We are not making sense of. We are not problem solving. We are just repeating back what they told us so that they know that they are seen and heard. Because in communication, being seen and heard allows the other person to take the ball and be able to also be seen and heard. It is a back and a forth process. This is vital for our kids who may not feel understood or may feel like there's something wrong or have a deep shame cycle going on in their bodies or may not necessarily be able to make sense of what's happening internally for them. I see this all the time with my kids with neurodivergence, especially my kids with a PDA profile. That deep sense that nobody gets me. Okay, so why in the world are they going to listen to anything anybody else says? They're just trying to protect themselves because nobody gets them. What this might look like for we're in a challenging moment with a kid, what reflective listening might looks like in a challenging moment. Let's say our kid was upset that they couldn't have screen time tonight and said, I don't even like you. I hope you get eaten by worms, right? Something ridiculous that sometimes our kids say. And most of us as parents might be like, stop talking to me like that. That's rude or that's disrespectful. It is. Okay. From an active listening and a reflective listening perspective, we might say something like, I can see that you're really, really frustrated. You're really frustrated at me because I'm saying that we need to be done with this thing. I hear you. You're really frustrated. That doesn't mean that we're accepting what they said to us. Step 2 is then setting a boundary and potentially moving away. But kids want to be seen and heard. And what I know of kids that need to be seen and heard is they're going to keep making the words bigger or the actions bigger until they're seen and heard. And so the power of active and reflective listening is usually when I introduce this to parents, it's a little like, wait, you want me to do what now? Because it seems somewhat counterintuitive, especially when we're really working on communication. We're working on connected communication. We're working on having a conversation about what went wrong with our kids. We're having a conversation about what we need to do today or something to that effect. This is the foundation. This is the foundation for our children in order to be able to truly grow those communication skills. The next strategy that I think about that is actually powerful in its absence of doing anything is the power of pausing in communication. So what do I mean by pausing? What I mean by pausing is often, as again, in our adult brains, we want to talk it through. We want to keep talking. Want to keep reiterating. We want to keep teaching. We want to be explaining so many things, especially when tensions are high. Maybe there's some struggle or some challenge happening. And the power of the pause allows us to remember to stop talking. It might be stop talking for 5 seconds. It might be stop talking for 30 seconds. It might be stop talking long enough that you realize that there's no more point in talking about this topic anymore. But what it does is it allows our brains to make that internal assessment so that our communication that we do have can be more intentional, more connected, and frankly, more powerful with our kids. And so when I ask parents to start pausing, first things first is we're just practicing pausing, because that's hard for most of us. Second, when we pause, it's to start thinking about like, am I talking because I'm not comfortable or because something actually needs to be said right now? Okay. If if it's about that I'm not comfortable, well then that's a whole different conversation. So an example of this might be, right, a child who slides down the slide and does the whoop and falls at the end of the slide, right? They might be a little disoriented. They might start like whining or crying a little bit. A way of communicating to our kids might be, see, I told you to be careful. Are you okay? Remember, next time I need you to go slower on the slide, right? There's lots of there's a lot of communication that's going towards the child. The power of the pause might be, we're going to see our child land on the ground, right? Land in the wood chips and be a little like, what just happened? And pause, pay attention to our own systems. Is this about us being anxious that our child is hurt? And is our child actually hurt? Is this about me feeling like I need to teach something in this moment? Do I need to say this right now? Or is this useful to say maybe another time, maybe when they're climbing up the slide? Right? It allows us to assess all of these conversations. I'm going to also give an example with an older child. I use examples, from my parenthood frequently. And with an older child, this might be, right, they blow up at us because we've set a boundary and they don't want the boundary. And then they cross the boundary, right? It is a pretty common teenage experience, parenting experience. Right. And then we wake up and they come back home and it's 10 o'clock at night and whatever. They cross the boundary and I'm angry and they're, they're ready for a fight. And so, right, when we're talking communication, we have some power to decide how that communication is going to go. And the power of the pause might be, you know what? I want to have a talk tomorrow. Let's talk about this. But right now, I'm going to just pause and I'm going to go to bed. And let's talk about this tomorrow. And you're going to go to bed. And we're just going to wait until tomorrow to talk about this. Or they ask me something and it's a really challenging decision and I don't know what to say. And I'm really kind of upset about it and I'm kind of angry and it kind of goes against everything I'm thinking. Communication could be us going through all of the reasons and all of the things that we think they should do or why they shouldn't be doing it or what I was doing when they were a kid and all of the long explanations that we tend to go into as parents. A way of creating pause would be, that's a really interesting thing that you're asking me for. And I can't answer you right now. I need a minute before I can answer you. We're going to talk about this again after school. Okay. So I'm verbally creating pause. I'm not saying we won't talk. Never am I saying you can't talk to me. I'm saying right now we both need a minute to think before effective communication can happen. What pausing does is it creates safety and it reduces shame. And the reason it reduces shame is because it slows down that knee-jerk over-explaining and teaching that happens when sometimes no words need to be said, or we just need to see the child's experience. Sometimes the experience in and of itself was enough of a teaching moment that we don't need to have a communication about it. And that's the power of the pause when we're thinking about communication. The next thing I want to think about today is, what is consent in communication? Consent in communication. Wait, now I have to ask consent from my child before I can talk to them? No. That's not what this is. It is helping our kids learn that in order for effective communication between two people to happen, both people need to be regulated and ready and in a safe place for the communication to happen, right? Otherwise, it's just one-sided communication, which decreases connection, decreases safety, and typically shuts our brain off to actually hearing what's being said. So, what does consent in communication look like? Consent in communication might be, hey, I want to talk about your homework. Do you want to do it now or do you want to do it in 5 minutes? It might be, getting down to their level and catching their eye before we start talking and sort of getting a visual cue that there's some readiness. Consent might be, can I tell you what I'm seeing? And then you can tell me if I've got it right. I'm noticing that when your sister comes up to you, you tend to get really mad and hit her. And so I'm wondering if you're needing space. Did I get that right? Right. I am not saying, why did you hit your sister? That's not consensual. It's, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm noticing. Am I on? Am I not? It's creating we probably do need to talk, but it doesn't need to be in this moment. Just giving kids some time and space to process and be ready for communication. This gives kids a sense of safety, and it gives kids a sense of control, shared control in communication, that especially for kids who feel like they need more time to process, for kids who've had communication patterns that haven't been effective, it allows there to be sort of a reset where they begin to know that they can come to their trusted people and begin communications that might be challenging, right? There's a container there. There's a sense of safety. And in communication, what we're really looking for in our kids is that we can have a back and forth about things that are tricky. We can have even reciprocal backs and forth so that we can all stay regulated and problem solve together to get through our days. And the last nugget that I'm going to leave you with today is shifting our language for sort of developmental level, for neurology, right? And this one's maybe a little bit more well known, but again, in our adult, fast-paced brains that we tend to operate from, I think it can be said again that long, drawn out, expansive explaining can absolutely work for some nervous systems, brain development, and can work for somewhat older kids. I'm talking 10 plus. Developmentally, as kids are younger on the developmental trajectory, fewer words are important. Saying it in a more succinct way is important. Breaking things down into shorter directions is important in order to match the communication needs of your child. And so I see this over and over and over and over again in my clinical work, where a short shift of just decreasing the words we're using, same intent, same point, decreasing the number of words can be incredibly powerful. The other piece that I think is incredibly important, especially with our neurodivergent kids, is questions are not always the way to start a conversation. Answering a question can be incredibly difficult for a neurodivergent brain. I have been told by kids that I've worked with that it's like you're trying to guess the right answer when you're asked a question. It's not that you think somebody's trying to figure out what you want or need or what your experience was, but you're trying to figure out the right answer. Like there's some sort of magical right answer. It's the question of how was your day, right? To most of us in this society, the correct answer is it was fine or it was all right, right? When you ask somebody with a neurodivergent brain, or many of us, how was your day? That question is fraught with confusion because, like, am I supposed to tell you how my day really was? And in how much detail am I supposed to tell you about my day? And if my day was bad, am I supposed to say it was a horrible day? Well, what if I don't know you very well? But what if I know you really well? There's too many variables. And so the idea of starting a conversation with a question can be really challenging, right? So we adjust. Tell me about what's in your backpack. I see a notebook in your backpack. Might be the start of communication. The other thing we want to really think about doing is just allowing that extra time to respond. Okay. Not all of us process language at the same rate. And so sometimes slowing down, and again, this is also the power of the pause in a different way, just providing some space to give some time for a response, to formulate a response. can be incredibly powerful and important. And so I hope that in this episode, you had some aha moments about communication and how we can think about communication potentially a little bit differently in our parenting, depending on the child that you're parenting right now, and hopefully be able to find a little bit of success. I am going to do a follow-up episode to this, a part 2 of communication that actually talks about some of the less obvious communication pieces like patterns, tone, timing, nonverbals, which really digs deep into how we support effective communication with our kids. All right, I think I'm going to leave it there. Thanks so much. Hello, parents. I'm Jen, the founder of Thriving Parents Collective, and I want to take a moment to speak to you directly from the heart. As a parent myself, I understand the joys and struggles that come with raising kids in today's fast-paced world. When I started this journey, I felt overwhelmed and very unsure. I realized that we all need a little support and guidance along the way. That's why I created Thriving Parents Collective, because I believe that every parent deserves to feel empowered and confident in their parenting journey. Our personalized coaching and courses are designed to meet you exactly where you're at. We can help you gain clarity, build stronger connections, and navigate the challenges of raising your unique child. Together, we can create a nurturing environment where both you and your child can thrive. If you're ready to take the first step towards a more fulfilling parenting experience, I invite you to visit us at thrivingparentscollective.com and schedule your free discovery call. Let's embark on this journey together. Where They're Planted is a Lit Path Studios podcast and is produced by Jamie Gale and Jen Bluske. Music is by Gaston Reen and Pod 5. Thank you for loving your child right where they're planted.